Empaths are individuals with an extraordinary ability to sense and absorb the emotions of others. They are natural healers, deeply compassionate, and often put the needs of others above their own. Empaths feel everything intensely: joy, sorrow, pain, and this emotional depth is both their greatest gift and their greatest vulnerability. Their kindness and willingness to help can sometimes become a doorway for those who do not have the same depth of empathy. On the other side of the spectrum stands the narcissist. Narcissists are individuals who crave admiration, attention, and control. Their world revolves around their own needs and desires, often at the expense of others. They are masters of manipulation, using charm, deception, and gaslighting to maintain power over those around them. Beneath their confident exterior often lies a fragile sense of self, one that is constantly seeking validation. The reason empaths and narcissists are so often drawn to one another is because of this perfect imbalance. Empaths are givers, constantly looking to help, heal, and understand. Narcissists are takers, always seeking admiration, attention, and emotional supply. It is a dynamic that can feel magnetic at first. The empath is captivated by the narcissist's charm, and the narcissist is drawn to the empath's endless compassion. But what begins as attraction can quickly become toxic. For the empath, the relationship becomes a cycle of giving without receiving. They try to understand the narcissist, to heal their wounds, to earn their approval. But the more they give, the more the narcissist takes. Empaths find themselves constantly trying to please, walking on eggshells to avoid conflict, questioning their own worth. Their kindness is used against them, and they often begin to lose sight of who they are. For the narcissist, the relationship is a source of constant validation. They feed off the empath's love, attention, and understanding, but they are never satisfied. Their need for control leads them to manipulate, criticize, and belittle the empath. They may use emotional abuse, silent treatment, or blame shifting to maintain their sense of superiority. To the narcissist, the empath is a mirror, a reflection that provides admiration, but is never allowed to shine on its own. But the true tragedy of this dynamic is that empaths are often unaware of their own power. They see their sensitivity as a weakness, their compassion as something to hide. They believe that if they can just be kinder, more understanding, more patient, they can change the narcissist. But in reality, they are pouring their energy into a bottomless well. The more they give, the more the narcissist takes, leaving them drained and confused. However, there is a secret hidden within this painful dynamic, a secret that the super empath understands. The empath's sensitivity is not a weakness. It is a superpower. It is a gift that, when paired with self-awareness and healthy boundaries, can transform them into something far stronger than the narcissist ever imagined. Because when an empath learns to protect their energy, to see manipulation for what it is, and to love themselves fiercely, they become unstoppable. And this is where the true power of the super empath emerges. They are still compassionate, still capable of great love, but they are no longer controlled by it. They recognize manipulation without falling for it. They set boundaries without guilt. They choose themselves without apology. And for the narcissist who thrives on control and validation, a super empath is not just a challenge. They are a force of nature. A super empath is a force unlike any other. They are not just individuals who feel deeply. They are individuals who understand their own emotions with profound clarity. They have walked through the fire of manipulation, betrayal, and heartbreak. But instead of being consumed, they have emerged stronger. Their sensitivity is not a weakness. It is a superpower, allowing them to sense dishonesty, detect manipulation, and understand others at a level most people cannot even imagine. But the true strength of a super empath goes beyond their ability to sense emotions. It is their self-awareness that sets them apart. They do not just feel, they understand what they are feeling and why. When they experience anger, sadness, or anxiety, they do not run from it. They sit with it, they explore it, and they learn from it. This self-awareness makes them nearly impossible to manipulate because they can recognize when someone is trying to play with their emotions, Resilience is another defining trait of a super empath. Life has tested them, sometimes brutally. They have been hurt by those they trusted, taken for granted by those they loved, and misunderstood by those who never saw their depth. But each time they were knocked down, they chose to rise again. They have learned to heal their own wounds, to stand back up stronger, and to use their pain as fuel for growth. Where others would become bitter, the super empath becomes wiser. This wisdom gives them an almost unshakable sense of intuition. They do not just listen to words, they feel the truth behind them. A super empath can walk into a room and sense the tension in the air, recognize hidden pain in a smile, or detect insecurity beneath a boastful tone. They are human lie detectors, not because of magic, but because they have learned to trust their instincts. And that instinct is a shield, protecting them from those who would seek to deceive them. But perhaps the greatest strength of a super empath is their ability to set boundaries. They are no longer the people pleasers they once were. They do not sacrifice their well-being to maintain someone else's comfort. They know their worth, and they refuse to allow anyone to diminish it. When a super empath says no, it is not a rejection. It is an act of self-respect. When they walk away, it is not because they are weak, but because they are protecting their energy. The super empath's strength is also rooted in their courage. It takes courage to love deeply in a world that can be cruel. It takes courage to stay kind after experiencing betrayal. It takes courage to remain open-hearted, even when they know the risk of being hurt. But they understand that closing off would be a betrayal of their own nature. So they continue to love, but they love wisely. They give, but only to those who give in return. And even when faced with those who would seek to take advantage of their kindness, a super empath remains unshaken. They see manipulation for what it is, and they choose not to engage. They understand that they cannot control how others behave, but they can always control their own response. When a narcissist tries to pull them into a game of mind control, the super empath refuses to play. They maintain their peace, their dignity, and their power. Above all, the super empath knows that their sensitivity is a gift, not a burden. They do not apologize for feeling deeply, for caring fiercely, or for loving fully. They have transformed their pain into wisdom, their heartbreak into strength, and their empathy into a force of nature. They are not just survivors of toxic relationships. They are warriors of the heart, unafraid to be both gentle and strong. A super empath has a gift that many underestimate, the ability to see through the masks people wear. When dealing with a narcissist, this gift becomes a superpower. While others may be dazzled by charm, flattery, or false promises, a super empath recognizes the subtle signs of manipulation. They sense the insincerity in a compliment that feels too forced. They notice the sudden shift in tone when the narcissist's needs are not immediately met. They pick up on the way praise quickly turns to criticism, the moment they assert their own boundaries. Gaslighting, one of the narcissist's favorite tools, is almost useless against a super empath. While gaslighting tries to make someone doubt their reality, a super empath has learned to trust their own perceptions. If something feels wrong, they do not ignore that feeling. They question it, they explore it, and they look for the truth beneath the confusion. When a narcissist tells them they are too sensitive or overreacting, a super empath recognizes this as a tactic to shift blame. They know what they feel, and they do not allow anyone to rewrite their reality. Another common tactic of narcissists is playing the victim, turning every situation around to make themselves seem helpless or mistreated. But a super empath is not easily fooled. They see the difference between someone who is genuinely struggling and someone who is using pity as a weapon. They recognize the crocodile tears, the exaggerated stories of suffering, and the way the narcissist's apologies are always followed by excuses. They do not allow guilt to be used as a leash around their neck. The silent treatment, another manipulative tactic, also loses its power against a super empath. When a narcissist tries to punish them with silence, hoping to provoke anxiety or desperation, the super empath responds with calm. They recognize the game being played and refuse to give it power. Instead of chasing after the narcissist or begging for communication, they take the time to focus on themselves. They understand that silence can be a gift, a moment of peace away from toxicity. Triangulation, another favored tactic where a narcissist brings a third person into the relationship to create jealousy or competition, is something a super empath sees right through. They refuse to be drawn into a fight for the narcissist's attention. They do not fall for the comparisons, the backhanded compliments, or the whispered gossip. A super empath knows their worth, and they do not compete for the approval of someone who thrives on drama. A super empath also recognizes the tactic of future faking, where a narcissist makes grand promises of a perfect future to keep them hooked. While others may be swept away by the fantasy, the super empath sees the inconsistency between words and actions. They understand that real love is proven through consistent behavior, not empty promises. When the narcissist says, "I'll change," the super empath thinks, "Show me." When they say, "We will be so happy together," the super empath looks at how they are being treated in the present. One of the most powerful insights of a super empath is their ability to recognize projection when a narcissist accuses them of the very behavior the narcissist is guilty of. Whether it is calling them selfish when they set a boundary, disloyal when they refuse to tolerate lies, or cold when they protect their own peace, a super empath sees through this projection. They do not absorb these false accusations as truth. They stand firm in their own understanding of themselves. But perhaps the most important ability of a super empath is their power to respond rather than react. Narcissists thrive on triggering emotional reactions: anger, fear, guilt. But a super empath with their deep self-awareness can pause and choose their response. Instead of getting caught in the web of manipulation, they maintain their calm, ask direct questions, or simply walk away. They know that not every battle is worth fighting, and not every word deserves a reply. Boundaries are the true armor of a super empath. While their heart is open and their compassion is vast, they understand that love without limits is not love, it is self-sacrifice. A super empath knows that they cannot pour from an empty cup, so they make a conscious choice to protect their energy. They have learned that setting boundaries is not an act of cruelty, it is an act of self-respect. It is a way of saying, "I value myself enough to decide how I am treated." One of the first boundaries a super empath sets is emotional. They understand that they are responsible for their own feelings, but not for the emotions of others. When someone tries to guilt trip them, shame them, or blame them for things beyond their control, they do not accept that burden. They are willing to listen, but they do not allow themselves to be used as emotional dumping grounds. They can care deeply without being consumed. A super empath is also clear with their time and energy. They know that their attention is a precious resource, and they refuse to waste it on those who drain them. They set limits on how much they give, how much they listen, and how much they invest in relationships that do not reciprocate. They do not feel obligated to stay in conversations that are toxic or spend time with people who disrespect them. They are not afraid to say no without apology. Communication is another area where a super empath's boundaries shine. They are direct and honest, but they are also calm and compassionate. They do not avoid difficult conversations, but they refuse to be pulled into pointless arguments. If someone crosses a line, they make it clear, this is not acceptable. They do not wait for others to read their mind. They state their needs openly and stand by them, and they do not allow themselves to be intimidated into silence. But perhaps the most powerful boundary a super empath sets is the boundary of access. Not everyone deserves a place in their inner circle. While they may be polite and kind to many, they are selective about who they allow close. They understand that trust must be earned, not given freely. If someone proves themselves to be dishonest, manipulative, or toxic, the super empath does not hesitate to distance themselves. Their kindness is not a pass for others to take advantage of them. Self-care is another form of boundary that a super empath fiercely protects. They prioritize their own well-being, making time for rest, reflection, and joy. They do not allow themselves to be pressured into overcommitting, nor do they sacrifice their peace for the sake of pleasing others. They understand that in order to be a light to others, they must keep their own flame burning. This is not selfish, it is survival. In relationships, a super empath does not confuse love with suffering. They know that real love is mutual, built on respect, trust, and kindness. They are willing to forgive mistakes, but they do not tolerate patterns of disrespect. If someone repeatedly lies, betrays, or mistreats them, the super empath does not wait around hoping for change. They are willing to walk away, knowing that losing someone toxic is not a loss, it is a gain in peace. Finally, the greatest boundary of a super empath is their commitment to self-awareness. They regularly check in with themselves, asking, am I being true to myself? Am I allowing someone to overstep my values? Am I giving more than I am receiving? And if the answer reveals a problem, they do not ignore it. They take action. They reinforce their boundaries, they protect their peace, and they continue to grow. Because for a super empath, boundaries are not just walls, they are the gates that protect their light. Silence is a language of its own, and for a super empath, it is a language of power. While the narcissist thrives on attention, praise, and reaction, silence is a withdrawal of everything they crave. It is not just the absence of words, it is the absence of energy, the refusal to engage in the narcissist's games. For a super empath, silence is not avoidance. It is a conscious choice, a way of saying, I will not feed your need for control. When a super empath chooses silence, it is like taking oxygen away from a flame. The narcissist, who once fed on emotional reactions, suddenly finds themselves in a void. They try to provoke, they try to manipulate, they try to trigger a response, but nothing comes. They are left alone with their own emptiness, forced to confront the reality they have tried so hard to avoid. Silence becomes a mirror, reflecting their own insecurities back at them. This silence is not a punishment, it is protection. A super empath understands that words are wasted on those who twist them, that explanations are pointless to those who do not want to understand. Instead of being dragged into arguments, gaslighting, or blame shifting, the super empath chooses peace. They conserve their energy, keeping it for themselves instead of pouring it into a bottomless pit. And in this space, they begin to heal. But for the narcissist, the silence of a super empath is unbearable. It strips them of their power because they can no longer control the narrative. They can no longer use guilt, charm, or anger to manipulate a response. The super empath's silence is a clear message. Your words have no power over me. Your games no longer affect me. It is a message that the narcissist cannot stand because it shatters their illusion of control. Sometimes the narcissist may try to break the silence with desperate tactics. They may flood the empath with apologies, false promises, or dramatic displays of affection. Or they may turn to insults, accusations, or threats, hoping to force a reaction. But a super empath understands that all of this is just another game. They do not take the bait. Their silence remains steady and strong, a fortress against manipulation. Silence also gives the super empath something invaluable: clarity. Away from the chaos of the narcissist's words, they can finally hear their own thoughts. They can see the truth without distortion. They begin to recognize the toxic patterns they were once caught in, and they gain the strength to maintain their distance. They learn that they do not need to explain themselves to someone who never truly listened. They do not need to justify their boundaries to someone who never respected them. But silence does more than protect, it empowers. The super empath learns that their value is not determined by someone else's approval. They discover that they are perfectly whole on their own. Their self-worth is no longer tied to the narcissist's opinion, and this freedom is a revelation. The narcissist may try to re-enter their life, but the super empath's silence remains a barrier they cannot cross. And while the narcissist may view silence as a weapon, For the super empath, it is a shield. It is a declaration of self-respect. It is a reminder that peace is more valuable than any argument. And it is proof that their greatest power was never in their words. It was in their ability to choose where their energy goes. Silence is not just the absence of noise. It is the presence of strength. A super empath understands that emotions are powerful, but they are not prisons. They know that while they may feel deeply, they do not have to be controlled by those feelings. When faced with someone who tries to manipulate their emotions, be it through guilt, shame, fear, or anger, a super empath pauses. They do not react impulsively. They take a breath, they step back, and they choose how to respond. This ability to pause is not weakness, it is wisdom. Manipulators often use guilt as a weapon, making the empath feel responsible for their happiness, their pain, or their mistakes. But a super empath has learned to recognize this trap. They understand that while they can be compassionate, they are not responsible for fixing someone else's life. When someone says, "If you really loved me, you would," the super empath hears the manipulation hidden in those words. They do not allow guilt to steer their decisions. Shame is another tool that manipulators use, trying to make the super empath feel unworthy or inadequate. They may criticize, insult, or mock, hoping to lower the empath's self-esteem. But the super empath has done the inner work. They know their own worth, and they refuse to let someone else's opinions define them. They understand that shame is not theirs to carry. It is often a projection of the manipulator's own insecurities. Fear is a powerful emotion, and manipulative people often use it to maintain control. They may threaten abandonment, create false crises, or use intimidation to make the empath comply. But a super empath does not make decisions from a place of fear. They know that while fear is a natural emotion, it should never be the driver of their choices. They choose courage, even when it is uncomfortable. They understand that true freedom comes from facing fear, not running from it. But the greatest tool of a super empath is logic. They do not just feel, they think. When someone tries to twist their words, they see the contradiction. When someone denies something they clearly did, the super empath remembers the facts. They trust their own memory, their own perception, and their own intuition. They do not allow gaslighting to distort their reality. Logic is their anchor, keeping them steady even in emotional storms. Self-love is another pillar of the super empath's strength. They have learned that love is not just something they give to others. It is something they must give to themselves. This self-love allows them to say no without guilt, to walk away from toxicity without regret, and to prioritize their own well-being without apology. They understand that sacrificing their peace for someone else's comfort is not love, it is self-betrayal. A super empath also understands that their emotions are messages, not commands. When they feel sadness, they ask themselves why. When they feel anger, they explore what boundary was crossed. They do not suppress their emotions, but they also do not allow them to make decisions for them. They have learned the art of emotional mastery, feeling without being controlled, understanding without being overwhelmed. And perhaps most importantly, a super empath knows that they are allowed to protect their peace. They are allowed to distance themselves from those who bring chaos, even if they once cared deeply for them. They are allowed to change their mind, to outgrow toxic dynamics, and to choose their own happiness. This is not cruelty, it is courage, because they have learned that the only person truly responsible for their emotional well-being is themselves. The greatest power of a super empath is not found in their ability to endure, but in their ability to walk away. For a super empath, leaving is not an act of weakness, it is an act of strength. They understand that staying in a toxic situation does not make them loyal, and suffering in silence does not make them loving. When they have given their all, when they have tried to heal, to help, and to understand, they recognize when it is time to choose themselves. Walking away is not easy for a super empath because their heart is wired for connection. They care deeply, they love fiercely, and they always want to believe in the good within others. But they have also learned that love without respect is poison, that compassion without boundaries is self-destruction. They have learned that choosing themselves is not a betrayal, it is survival. So when they reach the point of walking away, it is a decision made with clarity, not confusion. For the narcissist or manipulator, the departure of a super empath is devastating. They have grown accustomed to the constant supply of attention, understanding, and forgiveness. They have taken the empath's kindness for granted, believing it would never end. But when a super empath decides to leave, there are no second chances, no desperate pleas, and no lingering doubts. The door closes, and it does not reopen. The power of walking away is not just in the action itself, it is in the mindset behind it. A super empath walks away without bitterness, without the need for revenge, and without trying to prove a point. They do not waste time explaining themselves to those who never listened, nor do they wait for an apology that will never come. They walk away because they have outgrown the cycle of pain. They choose peace over chaos, self-love over self-sacrifice. But leaving does not mean forgetting. A super empath takes with them the lessons learned. They recognize the red flags they once ignored, the ways they were manipulated, and the patterns they allowed. But they do not carry resentment. They carry wisdom. They transform their pain into strength and their heartbreak into healing. They know that walking away is not just about ending a toxic relationship. It is about beginning a new chapter of self-respect. The impact of a super empath's departure is profound because it is absolute. There are no mixed signals, no back and forth arguments, no desperate attempts to be understood. Silence becomes their final message. Distance becomes their final boundary. They do not engage, they do not explain, they do not defend. Their absence speaks louder than any words they could say. And while the narcissist may try to pull them back with apologies, anger, or blame, a super empath remains unmoved. They see through the desperation, the manipulation, the false promises. They know that going back would mean losing themselves again, so they remain firm, grounded in their decision, and focused on their own healing. They understand that they are not leaving because they are weak, but because they are strong enough to know their own worth. For the super empath, walking away is not an ending, it is a beginning. It is the moment they reclaim their power, their peace, and their purpose. It is the moment they choose to stop explaining, stop fixing, and stop fighting for someone who never truly valued them. It is the moment they become unstoppable. Healing for a super empath is not just about forgetting the pain. It is about transforming it. They understand that every wound carries a lesson, and every heartbreak holds a hidden gift. Instead of running from their emotions, they sit with them. They allow themselves to grieve, to cry, to feel the full weight of their sadness, but they do not stay there. They use those emotions as fuel for growth. Where others see scars, they see stories of survival. The first step in their healing is self-awareness. A super empath does not just ask, "Why did they hurt me?" They ask, "Why did I allow it?" Not out of self-blame, but out of a desire to understand their own patterns. They recognize the moments they ignored their intuition, the times they prioritized others over themselves, and the red flags they tried to justify. This self-awareness is not meant to create shame. It is meant to create wisdom. From this wisdom, they learn to set stronger boundaries. They understand that loving someone does not mean losing themselves. They become more comfortable with saying no, with walking away, and with protecting their own energy. They are not afraid to be alone because they have learned that solitude is better than settling for someone who drains them. They do not just heal their wounds, they become stronger because of them. Healing also means rediscovering joy. A super empath does not allow their past pain to turn them bitter. They do not close their heart or build walls so high that no one can reach them. Instead, they learn to love wisely. They surround themselves with people who value them, who uplift them, and who respect them. They fill their life with passion, creativity, and purpose. They become the source of their own happiness, no longer dependent on anyone else to complete them. Their self-talk transforms as well. Where they once doubted their worth, they now speak to themselves with kindness and encouragement. They replace thoughts like, "Why wasn't I enough?" with, "I am more than enough." They understand that someone's inability to love them properly was never a reflection of their own value. They become their own best friend, their own protector, and their own advocate. A super empath also becomes a source of strength for others, but in a healthier way. They no longer try to save those who are unwilling to change. Instead, they become an example of resilience. They share their story, not as a victim, but as a survivor. They inspire others to set boundaries, to choose themselves, and to never settle for less than they deserve. Their pain becomes their purpose, their struggle becomes their story, and their healing becomes their gift to the world. But most importantly, they forgive, not for the sake of those who hurt them, but for themselves. They understand that holding on to resentment is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to suffer. Forgiveness is their way of freeing themselves from the past. It is a decision to release the pain, to reclaim their peace, and to focus on their own future. They do not forget, but they are no longer controlled by their memories. In the end, the super empath does not just survive, they thrive. They become wiser, stronger, and more confident than ever before. They are no longer afraid to feel, no longer afraid to love, and no longer afraid to walk away. They are living proof that even the deepest pain can be transformed into the greatest power. Their story is not one of defeat, it is one of victory.